Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Galaxy's Child, which is episode 16 of season 4 of Star Trek The Next Generation. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation one episode at a time. In this video, I cover the 4th season episode Galaxy's Child. So Galaxy's Child is the episode in which Dr. Leah Brahms comes on board the Enterprise to inspect the changes that Geordi has made to her engines. Geordi, of course, had created a holodeck program of her that he made out with, and that was hitting on him hard out a year ago in the episode Booby Trap, and so he's expecting a fling to happen between the two of them. However, when she comes on board, she's very antagonistic and very rude to him and is upset that he changed her engines, and in the meantime the Enterprise discovers a space-faring creature that whom attacks them, so they accidentally kill, but then they find out the creature is pregnant, and so they help birth the creature, but the creature attaches itself to the Enterprise and starts draining its energy because it thinks that the Enterprise is its mother. Meanwhile, Dr. Leah Brahms tries to bury the hatchet with LaForge, but then discovers the holodeck program that he had a year ago and is rightfully outraged by it. Then Geordi tries to gaslight her and saying that it's her fault for being a big meanie. And then for some reason, the two of them decide to bury the hatchet, work together in order to get rid of the baby that's attached to their ship, because the more adult creatures are coming towards them and could destroy the ship. So they've come up with a solution to sour the energy that the baby is sucking to make it lose interest and detach for the Enterprise, which happens just in time for the creature to for the baby to go back to its adult creatures or whatever. And then we see Geordi and Leah Brahms and 10 Forward reminiscing, and she wants to apologize to him for being so mean, and he is like, yeah, you're right, and still tries to hit on her, but then realizes that it's she's actually married. Anyway, so I would say that this is probably the second most problematic episode of The Next Generation behind Code of Honor, which of course is by far the most problematic. But I was trying to think of another Next Generation episode that might be more problematic than this one, and I was like, well, some people complain about a matter of perspective, but I actually don't. I mean, they did kind of go in a direction they didn't need to go, but I don't think it's as that bad. And then there's Sub Rosa, which it's more silly and comically bad than it is problematic. And maybe there's some episodes I'm forgetting about, but for my money, this one is what comes second to Code of Honor. And The Next Generation alone, I'm not counting other Star Trek shows, because then I'd have to mention shit like Prophet and Lace and Turnabout Intruder. But anyway, within TNG, yeah. So I watched a lot of reviews on this episode, as I usually do, and almost all of them spent the whole entire time talking about how creepy and disgusting this episode was, and how it pretty much did character assassination for Geordi LaForge. Now, I mentioned this episode when I talked about Booby Trap, because a lot of people were saying that Geordi was being really creepy in Booby Trap, which I didn't really find him all that creepy, because it was more of the computer, because all he said was told the computer to create a holographic version of Leah Brahms, and the computer is the one that made it creepy by having Brahms totally hit on Geordi and be like, every time you're touching the ship, you're touching me. And that's just weird, but to be fair, I went to Geordi's defense in that case because he wasn't the one making it weird. It was the Enterprise computer making it weird. Now, it's true that he did go along with the computer instead of being like, computer, what the fuck are you doing? Change the holodeck so she's not so creepy. So he is partly responsible, but I think it was mostly, why is the computer doing that? I've heard a theory out there that some people were suggesting that the Enterprise computer actually is in love with Geordi because he's the engineer and helps fix it. So I don't know. I think that's I wouldn't discount that possibility. But anyway, I did mention that about Booby Trap, that I didn't think LaForge was being all that creepy. But in this episode, he is. In fact, I mentioned that. I'm like, it's Galaxy's Child where you have to worry about him being a total creep. Now, the problem is that it's contrived writing all around. Because, and I think the ultimate situation with this episode is just very poorly written. And it's surprising like how poorly written this episode is, because I get what they were going for and what they want to get out of this episode, but that's not actually what they show us. Like, they want to get like a Geordi wasn't judging her on her own merits and had this image of what he thought Leah Brahms should be, and Leah Brahms was actually a real person, and so there was a conflict between them because of this. She failed to meet his expectations, and then he worked with her, got to know her, and then appreciated her for who she really was, and they became friends, not lovers, because that's what his unrealistic expectation was, but friends, because he learned to appreciate who she really was. Now, that's what the episode wanted to do, or tried to do, or thought that it did, but that's not what the episode actually did. What the episode actually did was made out the computer to be a complete liar, because the computer said in Booby Trap that the approximation holographic version of Leah Brahms was within her personality with a 9% margin of error. Well, what we saw on screen was more like a 80% margin of error than a 9% margin of error, because it was absolutely nothing like how the holodeck presented her to be. So it's showing that the Enterprise computer is not only like creepy, has it's in love with Geordi, but also very faulty, and apparently fucks up and gets things that should be simple wrong. I think they really need to do a complete diagnostics on the whole computer system, maybe overhaul it and replace it. So that's one thing that the episode actually does. And another thing the episode actually does is show Geordi as a fucking creep. That he is cheesy and hits hard out on this woman because he had a fling with the holographic version of her. And when she discovers this fling and is rightfully outraged, he then gaslights her by saying, "Oh no, you're being mean. I tried to be nice, and I'm guilty of trying to be your friend." When it's like, no, you're guilty of hitting on her hard out when she is your professional colleague and trying to do a job, and instead you disguise a business meeting as what's supposed to be a business meeting. You pretend it's a business meeting, but in fact it's a date where it's very clearly you're crushing on her, and she handles it very professionally by saying this is inappropriate and leaving, and yet he still crushes on her. He gets agitated, upset when she denies his advances. And then when she discovers that he had violated her privacy, he gaslights her and yells at her, and then she apologizes to him for it. As I said, I don't think that's what the writers intended to do with this episode, which is why I call it bad writing. Because it's obvious from the ending of the episode that's not what they thought they did. They thought that that first scenario that I presented, they thought that they presented a situation where, Geordi learns a lesson. He learns to appreciate people for who they really were. Like, his interactions with Guinan kind of indicate this as well. So, but they do such a bad job at writing it that it doesn't come off the way they intend. And it's funny because this episode's written by Maurice Hurley, which really surprised me because he was the showrunner in seasons 1 and 2, particularly season 2, but he left the show in season 2, and so I was actually shocked to learn that he wrote the teleplay for this episode in season 4. And then later he'll come back to, he has a story by credit in the 5th season episode Power Play. But those are the only 2 episodes outside of the first 2 seasons he has credit for. But it's weird that they'd bring him back, especially since he left Star Trek on what appeared to be bad terms. Like, no one seemed to like him. And he was like, in the interview he gave for the documentary Chaos on the Bridge, he was like, yeah, I didn't really like that job anyway. It wasn't for me. So why did he come back to write the script? I guess he needed the money. I mean, that's fair. And I guess Michael Piller and the writing staff were overwhelmed or short, which they said in season 4 they weren't, or at least not as much as they were in earlier seasons, but still, maybe they needed the extra help, and so they hired Maurice Hurley to do this script. I believe the idea of it was a spec script, but the teleplay was written by Maurice Hurley, and then apparently got uncredited rewrites by Jerry Taylor and Ronald D. Moore. Jerry Taylor rewrote the Geordi and Brahms storyline, and Ronald D. Moore rewrote the, or at least polished up the Galaxy's Child. A lot of people are calling it a space ravioli or pasta or something. But anyway, and I'll get more into that storyline later, but that storyline is actually really good. So it's kind of, you can tell that Ronald D. Moore spruced that one up. This storyline, I would never have guessed that Jerry Taylor rewrote it, because she's usually a good writer, and of course she's usually, presents things. She's one of the few female writers in, Star Trek, particularly going forward in the later seasons. I think she was the only one for most of at least on the regular staff, for most of the show's run. And so you'd think that she'd present it from a more of a feminine perspective rather than making Geordi this chauvinistic asshole who is sexually harassing one of his colleagues, and yet we're supposed to be sympathetic with him. And at the end of the episode ends with her apologizing to him because he sexually harassed her. Now again, I know that's not what the writers intended to show, but that's why I expected more of Jerry Taylor. Maybe I'm judging too harshly. Maybe she was just overwhelmed. Maybe she was in a rush. Maybe Michael Piller or Rick Berman overruled some of her rewritings and made it like all weird and creepy. But I'm still shocked that she worked on this script. So, and it does need to be said that there was different mentality in the 90s. This kind of thing was more appropriate, and I guess a lot of people wouldn't see this as sexual harassment. And I will admit to myself that I never noticed these things until they were pointed out to me within the past decade. So for the first couple of decades I saw this episode, I never noticed something wrong, because, and this is probably what the show was banking on, is because you identify with our main characters more, and you see from their perspective. And so, and plus the episode keeps trying to tell you with the way Guinan behaves and the way the episode is trying to feed you a narrative that, Geordi just had unrealistic expectations of this woman because he fantasized about her, and she didn't meet his expectations and was being really mean to him. And then he realized that they need to work together, and he needs to appreciate her for who she actually is. As I said, that's what the episode obviously is trying to tell you. And so when the episode tells the audience, like, this is what this episode is about, a lot of times the audience will go along with that and be like, okay. And to be honest and to be fair, I did as well for the first 20 years. I was like, because I didn't give it that much thought, and I was like, and I wasn't really that aware. I could even say that woke. No, I wasn't that aware of, because I was young and inexperienced, of the intricacies of what LaForge was doing, because I was just listening to what the episode was telling me. It's like a similar situation with the episode Tuvix in Voyager, because the episode tells you that Janeway is killing Tuvix in order to save Tuvok and Neelix, so a lot of the audience gobble that up. But when you actually look at it, it's actually what the episode's telling you is wrong. She's not killing Tuvix. It's that Tuvix doesn't exist. He's just a different version of Tuvok and Neelix, but combined, and so she's just uncombining them. So it's, in a way, it's restoring these two people to their original form, which is more like surgery than it is like killing someone. But when I try to make this point, which is an objective fact, people reject it because they gobble up what the episode tells them it's about. No, the episode tells me it's about Tuvix being murdered, and Janeway unjustifiably murdered him. So that's what happened, because that's what the episode's telling me. And I think it's the same thing here with Galaxies. God, I talk about Tuvix a lot. I'm sorry, I can never let that one go. That episode sucks. Anyway, yeah, it's the same situation here with Galaxy's Child. That the episode is telling me that it's just about Geordi not having fair expectations when he's actually sexually harassing her and gaslighting her, and she's apologizing to him for it, and that's really, really fucked up. But to be fair, most people in modern times have noticed this. As I said, all the reviews I watch and read have mentioned this, and there was a review from can't really pronounce his last name. Keith is his first name. He wrote a lot of Star Trek novels. He did written reviews on pretty much every Next Generation episode, and in his review for this episode, he said it made LaForge out to be a virtual rapist. And I don't know what he means, but does he mean like he's virtually a rapist, or he's like virtual as in like VR, like technology using the holodeck as I don't know. Either way, it's a strong statement that I can't say I disagree with. So yeah, that's this episode is definitely more, and to be honest, like, I never noticed these things before because I never paid much attention to this episode. It was always just a throwaway, mediocre episode to me that I never really cared much about. And as I mentioned before in many other videos, I saw this before I saw Booby Trap, so I didn't really get the reference that they were making until a year later or so. I finally saw Booby Trap, and I was like, oh, so that's who this Leah Brahms person is. It's funny that how season 4 does so many sequels to other shows and brings other episodes and bring back other characters when Next Generation is supposed to be episodic, and season 4 is so not episodic, which is a good thing. And here's the thing. I think bringing Leah Brahms back and having Geordi meet the real Leah Brahms is a good idea. It's a good concept. But they needed to execute it way better than what they did. It was executed so poorly. As I said, it's terrible writing that really is the downfall of this episode. And I do need to emphasize that when Dr. Brahms comes aboard the Enterprise and she's like, "Oh, you're the ones who fouled up my engines," and then she's just like biting Geordi's head off for every little change that he made on the engines, that's terrible writing too. It's not just how they treated Geordi, it's also how they treated her. And it's contrived writing. They're doing it to be like, "Oh, Geordi's expecting them to be in love, but oh no, she's being mean to him instead. Da da da." Trying to create like this tension, but it actually doesn't make any sense that she would behave like that. Like, first of all, Picard says when Geordi goes to meet Picard and Picard's telling him about Leah Brahms coming on board, she's like, "Oh, someone at Starfleet Engineering Corps is taking appreciation to your work and wants to come on board to discuss your work." So implying that they really like his work and they want to come and discuss. So just leave the whole Leah Brahms out of it. Let's pretend it's John Doe. No, that's the dude from Transfiguration. Let's pretend I'm looking at a poster of The Expanse. So let's pretend it's James Holden. James Holden, the Starfleet engineer, really likes Picard says he really likes your work and he appreciates what you've done. He wants to come on board to discuss, your work and what you did to the engines. And so James Holden then beams on board, and then the first thing he says to Geordi is like, "Oh, you're the one who fucked up my engines," and then constantly rails against him for screwing up his engines. And I was like, well, why the fuck did Picard tell him he appreciated the work and he was coming aboard to discuss your work? Like, that makes no sense. What, is Picard just bad at his job? Like, was the engineering, did Leah Brahms lie to him about appreciating Geordi's work? Was it like a backhanded, deceptive way for her to get on board and so that she could yell at him? Like, like none of those things make any sense. And plus, the way that what she was complaining about was dumb. Of course he's going to change the engines. And so that whole thing was contrived. She was acting unrealistically out of character and also, it's like the thing I mentioned before, as in Booby Trapped, they said it was a 9% margin of error, but yet they're having her character be totally different, like nothing, absolutely nothing like the character that was on the holodeck. That is way more than a 9% margin of error, so it was terribly written. As I said, the concept could have been done better if they actually wrote it better instead of doing this contrived, like, sitcom level. And this is how I noticed a Maurice Hurley script. People say I love to rant on Rick Berman and criticize him every chance you get. But don't forget, I love to do the same thing for Maurice Hurley. I don't do it as much because Maurice Hurley wasn't involved in the Star Trek franchise for as long. He was only there for 2 years. But if you watch any videos I do on the first and especially the second season of Next Gen, you'll probably hear me complaining about Maurice Hurley. And part of what I hated about Maurice Hurley's style of writing is very elementary. It was very sitcom-y. That's why I hated a lot of the season 2 episodes, that they felt like sitcoms. And that's what this feels like. And that's why I can tell it's Maurice Hurley. Why the fuck did they let him come back? Because it's very obvious sitcom level bullshit with her being like, "Oh, you're the ones who fouled up my engines." Like, that doesn't make any sense. But then you get the scene, as I alluded to earlier, where Geordi says, "Oh yeah, let's go have a meeting to discuss our agenda, what we want to accomplish for the next couple days while you're here," which sounds reasonable, and it sounds like he's trying to reach an olive branch out to her and trying to, trying to feed her antagonism, not trying to be antagonistic towards her, and being like, "Look, let's sort this out. Let's sit down and we'll meet and we'll discuss how we want to proceed. And then he's like, oh yeah, by the way, we could do this, we could eat while we're doing this as well. I make a good food genie. And she's like, oh, that's my favorite food. And it's like, wow, no kidding. That's creepy. But anyway, so that was the first step of him making it creepy. He's like, oh yeah, we'll just eat while we make this discussion. And then we see him in his quarters setting everything up to be like super romantic, which I hate this. And like, there's several, it doesn't happen very often, but there's several movies or TV shows that will do something that's so embarrassing. Like, I feel so embarrassed for the characters that I don't want to watch it. I can barely watch it. Like, there have been some shows where I literally fast forward through this. It's like, I can't watch this. It's too bad. It's too bad. And I really wanted to fast forward to this scene when I was rewatching this episode yesterday. And it was so difficult to watch. It made me so uncomfortable. I'm not even talking when Leah Brahms get there. I'm talking mainly about before she's there and Geordi's in his quarters, like, oh, let's bring down the lights. Oh no, too far. Bring it up a little bit more. That's good. I want to set the mood. And he puts on like the candles, and the prop department did a good job, though I will commend them that, but the script is bullshit. And then he's like, puts on the music. Oh, I have to get the music just right. No, let's do that. Oh, let's do this soft guitar, and let's put out the candles and the mood lighting. And he's like dressed in a freaking casual wear, and he fucking told Dr. Brahms said he was going to have a professional meeting to discuss their agenda, and she shows up there to his quarters, like in his room, and which should have been her first clue something was off. She should have been like, well, no, let's go meet in 10 Forward instead. But maybe she just assumed, oh, maybe he just likes to work from his room. Maybe he has his working station in his room like Data does and Picard does. But no, she goes to his room. He's in a casual wear with candles. Well, it wasn't candles, but the equivalent. Might as well been candles. And the mood lighting and the music playing. And like the dinner table set like a fancy restaurant, like a romance, like Valentine dinner type thing. And she goes into what she thought was going to be a work meeting and sees that instead. And it's just like, what the fuck? I actually gotta go. And to her credit, she actually stayed for a little bit. She didn't immediately get the fuck out of there, which I think most people's instinct would be to do that. But she did stay for a little bit in order in the name of trying to get a better working relationship. And she, saying things like, I'm sorry if I'm coming off as too, aggressive. I'm just feel very passionate about my engines. And Geordi's like, no, I totally understand. I feel the same way. By the way, what did you do with your hair? Your hair looks a bit different. Like, what? And, oh, God. But then she eventually does leave saying, I don't think it would be appropriate. Now, it's funny. Why didn't she mention that she was married here? She mentions it later on, but it seems like Geordi made his intentions very fucking clear. And maybe it was just like an accumulative thing. By the way, I'm going to make it clear I'm not blaming her. She has no obligation to tell him this. But I'm just from the writing standpoint, it was like, why did they choose the later scene to do it and not this scene? Because it doesn't really matter whether or not she's married. Geordi should not be behaving this way with a professional colleague, fucking regardless. And that's weird. I said fucking regardless. Anyway, so Geordi gets rejected, and then he's meets her in engineering the next day, and it does seem like he's being professional and ready to work. And I'll be honest, I didn't think he was being all that creepy in this scene. Certainly not as bad as the other scenes. Like that dinner thing, like, As I said, I really wanted to fast forward through it. It was painful. It was so painful to watch. But the Jeffrey Tube scene, which, by the way, this is the first time we're seeing an actual Jeffrey Tube, how they'll be portrayed in the show going forward. There was something they called the Jeffrey Tube that was shown in the episode Manhunt. No, not Manhunt. That's the Loxana Troy. I always get... No, The Hunted. That's the one I'm thinking of. Anyway, the episode The Hunted... they showed these what they call Jeffrey Tubes, but they're actually like full-on corridors, and they used those same sets for like alien corridors. Like I think they used it in Future Imperfect as well. So that wasn't really a Jeffrey Tube. This is the first time we see a real Jeffrey Tube. But anyway, so in this scene, in the Jeffrey's Tube, like it seems like they're burying the hatchet. Like she's actually stopped being cartoonishly aggro, which was always very contrived and bad writing, and started being more reasonable and being like, oh, look what you did to the thing. That's actually really good work. It's really impressive. Like you should write a paper about this because people should see this work and it should be shared. And Geordi's like, writing's your strong suit. Why don't we collaborate? And that's very reasonable. Like that is a professional way for LaForge to act, to be like, well, we should collaborate on this because I think writing's your strong suit. It's not really my strong suit. But then he starts getting, and again, look, I don't really fault him that much for this behavior, where maybe he should have done it in his free time, not during work hours, but still, he wasn't being that aggressive about it or creepy about it. He was like, oh, I was just, I've studied your work, I've admired what you've done, and I was hoping the two of us could become friends. And this was when she was like, okay, if you're implying what I think you're implying, you should know that I'm married. Which, again, he's not coming off as so, like, romantically interested as the dinner scene. So I think she should have brought that up in the dinner scene. But as I said, she's under no obligation to do so. In fact, she's just... letting him know, because, and again, I don't think there's not much wrong with this scene in particular. I think it's reasonable, and once Geordi learned, when she says she's married, she's like, and even like, if she wasn't married, she could just say, look, Commander, I'm just not interested in you in that way, and I would like to keep our relationship professional. If she said that, and Geordi responded by being like, I understand, and then took a more professional tone, even though on his free time he could be disappointed. Like, that would be reasonable. That would be understandable. But, so I didn't have that big of an issue with the Jeffrey's Tube scene. But then we get him whining to Guinan and 10-4, saying, oh, she hates me, she's destroying my work, and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, wait a second. She just reconciled with you. She was just praising you for the work that you did. So why are you going in there bitching the Guinan about how she's such a bitch, when really it seems like the only thing you're upset about is that she turned you down, that she's married? Because sure, when she first came on board, she was being a cartoon, aggravated, unrealistic, asshole. But then she sort of, after their talk and after she sort of tried to make it work with Geordi, she was being a lot more reasonable and a lot more professional. So he had no reason to be upset at that stage, rather than being pissed off because he got turned down, which is, I understand being upset. Trust me, I understand being upset when someone turns you down, but you're not going to be like aggro about it and you complain to the guy and it's like, oh, she's a bitch, she's so terrible. And like, that's, yeah. So Guinan very rightfully is like, oh, you had your old visor on, and sort of trying to give him the tough love. Seems like Guinan's always giving Geordi tough love and telling him the shit that he doesn't want to hear when he goes to whine about something. But anyway, then we get the scene where she is in the holodeck, and it's supposed to be, again, this is a very sitcom scene, so I can see Maurice Hurley's fingers on this. where she goes in and sees the holodeck program of the other version of herself acting creepy as fuck and saying every time you touch the ship you're touching me, and then her response I think is absolutely justified and absolutely a natural response where she's yelling and she's pissed and she's like, I've been violated. Like, she totally deserves. That is the correct response to have in that situation. And Geordi's response is not the correct response. Geordi's response should have been, I'm deeply sorry. I'm so sorry. I should have told you about this from the start. This is my mistake. There's no excuse for it. I'll delete it immediately, and I will respect your boundaries. I'm so sorry. Is that what he said? No. Instead, he yells at her. I've been nothing but nice to you. I'm a nice guy. You just hate nice guys, and I've been nothing but nice to you. And your response is to come in here and treat me like shit and yell at me all the time and be this huge bitch. And all I wanted to do was be your friend, and you're responding. And I was like, dude, Geordi, you're not even addressing the fucking fact that she just uncovered this creepy version of herself that he did make out with. I don't know if she's aware of that, but she definitely can tell something happened as she's like, was it good for you? Like, and he doesn't even fucking apologize for that. He just yells at her instead. And as I mentioned, she had already like buried the hatchet with them. She was already being more professional. She was already being nicer. She was already praising him for his work. The fact that she came in the holodeck and found this program has nothing to do with her cartoonishly aggro behavior at the start of the episode. It is a totally separate thing. And for Geordi to sort of equate the two and use that as an excuse to fucking gaslight her is fucking despicable. This is flat out character assassination for Geordi LaForge. And then later, when they're in the middle of the crisis with the, space ravioli, how can I say that word? Anyway, the pasta thingy. She comes up and is like, look, you need my help right now, and I'm willing to help. And he's like, okay, let's help. And then they start talking, and almost immediately they become friendly. They're like, oh, let's do this. Let's sour the milk, and let's do that. And they work together, and they get it done, and they save the ship. And then you see them in 10 forward afterwards, having a drink and laughing. And she's like, I should apologize to you. Now, to be fair, in Geordi's slight of defense, his very ever slight defense, he does say, no, you shouldn't apologize. I'm the one who should be apologizing. Damn fucking right, Geordi. That's an understatement. But anyway, so at least he had the good graces to do that, but that's not enough. And then he's like, I should have told you about this from the start, which is, again, absolutely 100% true. He should have divulged that information from the beginning. Maybe he could have undersold the creepy, sexy part of it and just be like, look, we were in this crisis. I asked the computer to create a facsimile of you, and she was being kind of flirty with me, and I know this was just a simulation and it was the computer's doing, and I went along with it, but just to let you know what happened. And yes, it would make their working together awkward for sure, but at least he would have been being honest instead of her finding about it later and then things even being more awkward. But anyway, so and she's laughing about it. She's like, oh, I was going to say this is how you could tell the episode was written by men, but Jerry Taylor rewrote this, so I'm still baffled by that. But anyway, but you can tell it's written by Maurice Hurley because it's so sitcom-y. But anyway, yeah, she's laughing about it. She's like, "Oh, did you see the look on your face?" It's like, "Well, look on my face. How about the look on your face?" Oh, that's something I'll never forget. Ah ha 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 ha. She's just laughing at the fact that he sexually harassed her and was essentially had a deep fake of her that he would make out with, and he never really apologized. Like, the closest he came is when she said, "Oh, I should apologize." It's like, no, I should be the one apologizing. Which, you could say it was an apology, but he never apologized. In the moment, he yelled at her, and yet she's being all friendly with him. Like, that's the most unrealistic part about this episode. So, yes, it makes this episode really unbelievable and really, really hard to watch. Now, here's the thing, though. Did we get the B plot? And usually a B plot is something that's a throwaway. I always say it's a throwaway bullshit anomaly, bullshit. Whereas this is actually way better than the A plot. I actually love this B plot. I actually do think it makes the episode really good. Now, I've heard some people criticize Picard's decisions that he makes in the episode, where Worf is always like, "Let's fire phasers, raise shields." Now, the one thing I will say I agree with Worf on is when Worf suggests to raise the shields, and Picard's like, "No, I don't want to be hostile," but then the creature attacks the ship, and their only response is to fire phasers back, minimum setting, which kills it still, and that could have been avoided if Picard just raised the fucking shields like Worf said. And so that was definitely Picard's mistake. But going forward, I think Picard was absolutely right to not listen to Worf, because Worf kept wanting to kill the baby or abandon the baby or not give a shit about the baby, which would be the wrong thing to do. And it was a really intense moment. It was a deeply emotional moment when they accidentally killed the creature, and how devastated Picard was. You could, Patrick Stewart, always amazing, but the way he portrayed that with just his looks on how fucking devastated. I almost wanted to shed a tear in that moment. It was actually really powerful that they, came across this creature that they thought was magnificent, but then ended up killing it, and how devastated he was over this. Now, a lot of people have heard we're mentioning Gumtu or Tin Man from the episode Tin Man, because they're acting like this is the only living creature in space, but they met one before. And in their defense, Tin Man was totally different. Tin Man was a sentient ship. So you get the feeling that if it's a spaceship, that it was probably artificially constructed. Even though I do know it was organic, it still could have been artificially constructed. Maybe it wasn't, but either way, it was totally different than this space creature, which obviously is just like a creature sort of thing. It looks like a worm or something floating in space. So totally different situation than Gumtu. I don't think they ever specifically say that, oh, this is the first space creature we've ever met. But they do seem shocked by its existence. Oh my god, there's something just existing in space. To me, I think the greater contradiction would be, of course, this is Discovery's fault, because it's a retcon in Discovery, where Discovery introduced these space whales that apparently are very well known, and they're a protected species under Federation law, and so they have to, they're an endangered species or whatever, so they have to help save them. And there's these gormaganders or something, I think they're called, they're space whales. So that's really similar to what these things are. So these things shouldn't be that weird to Picard. Picard should be like, oh, it's another space creature, kind of like those space whales that we know of. But maybe they are extinct by the 24th century. Maybe the Federation's effort to save them wasn't successful. That's a possibility, but the stronger possibility is that Discovery just fucking retconned this, because it does that a lot, and it's not to be clear, I'm not really upset over it and thinking, how dare they, Discovery is not really Star Trek, it's retconning canon, how dare they violate canon. I don't give a shit. It's just because all Star Trek shows violate canon like this. But it is the case of that not really fitting with this episode. But again, that's not that big of a deal. So anyway, when they consult Dr. Crusher to try to birth the creature, which I thought was brilliant, actually. Having the doctor be involved in this makes total sense, because she would know more about biology, and she was being clear, like, I don't know enough about this creature to say anything with certainty, but judging by how all living creatures are like, these are my best recommendations. And they do like a cesarean section, but using the phasers, like, that was very interesting. I think that was very well done. And again, Worf, his suggestions of, just kill it and just leave it behind, and the baby could be a risk. Even though he was right, the baby was a risk, it was still the right thing to do, to birth the baby and not just fucking leave it there to die. That would be fucked up. And absolutely, they shouldn't have listened to Worf, 100%. So, there was this deleted scene on the Blu-ray. If you have the Blu-ray, they have some deleted scenes. The one for this episode is when they first saw the space creature, and Picard starts reciting this nursery rhyme or something that I'm unfamiliar with. I don't know if it's fictional or not, but he starts quoting this nursery rhyme, and then Worf finishes the rhyme, and then Picard's like, Mr. Worf, it seems like you and I have read the same nursery rhyme. And then Riker then is a total dick to Worf. He's like, all of a sudden, like, Mr. Worf, go scan. He's like being aggravated. Like, how fucking dare you recite this thing? Go do your scanning, god damn it. Get back to work. I hated that. Like, why the fuck is Riker acting like that? So I can kind of see why they deleted that scene. Like, I like the part with Picard and Worf, but Riker's reaction to Worf made no sense whatsoever. And it is a little bit out of character for Worf, but in a good way. I think it's good to see him, like, sort of do more than simply, be like, fire phasers and kill it. Like, so I liked that for Worf, but I hated it for Riker. Anyway. So they birth the baby, and then it attaches itself to the Enterprise and starts sucking its power. And then they're like, sir, what should we do when the Enterprise is losing power? And Picard's like, absolutely nothing. And I love that. I think that was a really great, suspenseful moment, because Picard doesn't want to fucking kill it. Like, he was bad enough. He killed his parents. But at the same time, like, he can't let it destroy the Enterprise. So it's sort of, stuck in a very rough situation at the moment. Like, any action they take could kill the creature. So he needs to convene his senior officers and try to come up with a better plan to try to get rid of the creature without killing it. And then they discovered that the asteroid belt is where it seems to have all the food that the creatures need to survive. So they're like, okay, let's take it to this asteroid belt, and then we got to get some way to get it off of us once it's there, because then it will be able to survive. I heard some people suggesting that if the Enterprise simply had just left right away after its birth like it was going to, that it probably would have just died, which I kind of agree, but in that situation, like, they don't really know what to do for it. But then once it attaches itself, they're like, okay, we can take it to where it needs to go, but once it's there, we need to get it the hell off our ship. And so they try this one plan, it doesn't work, and I'm sorry, but the CGI, and I know it's like early 90s CGI, which is before CGI really became a thing, but it's definitely like video game level. It's definitely, and maybe this is from a more modern perspective, but Yeah, it's terrible. Like, there's some later episodes, like a Voyager and Enterprise, where people are like, oh, the CGI looks terrible. And I was like, it actually looks passable to me. But here, yeah, this is like video game level stuff. It looks very bad. But, it's, 1990? So it's, I can excuse it. Or 91, I think, at this stage, actually. But still, you can excuse it. But, so yeah, it was actually it was a good sort of ticking clock where they found the other creatures were coming towards them, and they looked hostile, and the other creature attacked them, and of course they see the Enterprise with the baby. They might consider the Enterprise a threat, and although wouldn't most creatures like that, like if they see the baby attached to it, wouldn't they understand that this other creature is caring for the baby? I don't know. It wouldn't be that way with something like bears or lions or something. They would probably just fuck you up. Get the hell away from my baby. But it's not their baby. It's another baby. And so I've heard some other people suggest that maybe these creatures killed the baby. But that's really cynical. I don't think that's definitely not what the episode was implying would happen. But they were being hostile and they were coming towards the Enterprise, and I liked this. I thought it was a really intense, suspenseful moment, and they had to get it off the ship right away, and they finally were able to come up with Geordi and the Browns were able to come up with a solution that worked by souring the milk, as they'll tell Scotty later on. And they got it off the ship, and I love how when the creatures were moving towards the Enterprise, they're almost there, and the baby was getting like upset, and as they were trying to get it off the ship, and Worf's like, oh, they're increasing speed, sir, they're changing color. I don't know, there's something really funny about Worf saying they're changing color. I don't know why I find that funny, but I do. So anyway, but then they managed to get it off, and the ravioli goes back to the other ones, and they live happily ever after. So I think this is a more impressive B plot. So most situations with the A plot, B plot, the B plot is some bullshit anomaly, BS that has nothing to do with anything, but this time they tie in the B plot quite nicely into the A plot. It's very relevant to it, but it's also way more interesting, which is usually not the way, especially going forward when we get to season 5. The B plot will be nonsense, boring, and nobody gives a shit about it, where here I was more interested in the B plot than I was the A plot. It was the same thing with the episode The Loss, but that wasn't so much that the B plot was good, that was more of the fact that the A plot was so terrible that having a mediocre, forgettable B plot would be better than having a piece of shit, terrible A plot. Whereas here, it's almost the same. Like, the A plot is like much worse and is quite terrible. But I think the B plot would be good regardless of which A plot it was paired with. In fact, I think it could withstand a whole episode on its own, because I think it is actually really interesting and a really interesting storyline that's done really well. So, I would now like to thank my Patreon supporters for supporting me on Patreon. Is very much appreciated. I want to give very special thanks to Brandon Neil Howells for all your support for the channel. It's very much appreciated. So I also want to give a shout out to Antarius, Greg Marley, Francisco, Chuck Hooks, Kyrie091, Anthony D. Benedictus, Ricky, Matty Jester, Joe Lavals, Alessandro Miguelcio, Norman Buchwald, Stephen Kennedy, Brenton Berg, and Allison Fordyce. Thank you all so very, very much for your support. So, we do have a few patron comments for this episode. First comment is from Kyrie091, who says, hey, on Final Mission, I wish that I had said Final Mission, more like Wine Owl Mission. I don't have a good pun for Galaxy's Child, so instead I'll make Mark say the following sentence out loud on video. I love Endgame, and it's the finest piece of television ever produced. Love you, Mark. I'm so sorry for making you say such hurtful lies to your audience. I will never do it again. Well, Kyrie091, actually, that's not a lie. I do, in fact, love Endgame. Avengers Endgame is one of my favorite movies of all time. I love it. I think it's the best Marvel movie MCU ever made. It's very satisfying and concludes all of the character arcs of the MCU very nicely. But you said television, so actually maybe you're not talking about Avengers Endgame, so maybe you're talking about the episode in Babylon 5, which is actually my number one favorite episode of Babylon 5 when I did my top 10 Endgame, when they conclude the story arc of the Earth Rebellion, where Earth got taken over by a dictatorship. I fucking love that episode. I think that's easily the best episode of Babylon 5, and yeah, I think that's absolutely amazing. So that must be what you're talking about, because certainly there isn't anything in Star Trek called Endgame, because if there were, I'm sure it would be a total piece of shit and the worst series finale ever invented. Anyway, next comment is from Antarius, who says, although I have watched the series several times, I didn't remember this episode, and it is obvious why. The creature is poor and boring copy of Gum 2 from Tin Man, and I couldn't care less for the Leah Brahms and Geordi relationship. Even the usage of a real person on the holodeck is a repetition of a theme of Hollow Pursuits. Is it my imagination, or do the actors look bored acting this script? An absolute negative example of an A and B plot without any connection whatsoever. What happens to Geordi's girlfriend from Transfigurations? Didn't she like Geordi's strange pullover he is wearing for dinner? My rating is 2 out of 10. Yeah, that's a good question. Will they ever do the Christy Henshaw? I said before they should have kept her. And actually, this brings back the greater thing about how LeVar Burton was so upset the way that he treated, or the way the writers treated Geordi LaForge, and I think that's probably more true for this episode, even though he never mentioned it specifically, but more in general how they made Geordi like a nerd who didn't understand women, always failed with women. He thought that was terrible and hated it, and I agree, and I think they fixed that in Transfigurations with Christy Henshaw, and they should have kept her around, but instead of doing this bullshit episode. Anyway, next comment is from Brendan Nealhouse, who says, is Leah Brahms an uptight bitch or what? According to Picard's log, Leah is coming specifically to congratulate Geordi because he's made all these improvements to the Enterprise engines, but she does nothing but find fault with him. Again, I have to ask, where the fuck are the privacy settings on the holodeck? I don't let people through my browser history. The difference between Geordi and Reg is Reg has a crush on Troy, whereas Geordi is clearly hoping for a sexual relationship with Leah Brahms. He's not going to get anywhere in that silly-looking pullover which he should have given to Guinan. What the fuck happened to Christy? It is really boring watching Geordi being a starry-eyed virgin again. Who left the line, every time you look at the engine, you're looking at me. Every time you touch it, it's me, in the script? That's Jimmy Savile level creepy. As a dear online friend is fond of saying, kill your darlings. That was probably Maurice Hurley. Fuck. Anyway, so the Enterprise does a cesarean section on the alien it accidentally killed, and aliens like this has never been seen before. Has everyone forgotten Gum 2 so quickly? Yum! Space ravioli. Gimme, gimme, gimme. It is unbelievable that 1, the computer doesn't mention Leah's unnamed husband. 2, Geordi and Leah end up laughing over this misunderstanding. This episode always makes me feel deeply uncomfortable because I have had more than a few crushes like Geordi's. 2 systems named after bombed Spanish cities, which inspired a Picasso painting out of 10. I can't even remember what this system was called, but that's just me. But yeah, the computer should have mentioned that Leia was married, and the computer should have mentioned that Leia would attack anyone who changed their engines. The computer was... I said it's completely flawed and it needs an overhaul. It needs to be replaced. And plus it has a crush on Geordi. Anyway, next comment is from Stephen Kennedy, who says, I wasn't going to write a comment for this episode. Maurice Hurley did the teleplay and Tom Cartizan wrote the story. They only wrote 4 episodes ever and 1 Star Trek, which was his last written credit. The Galaxy's Child part was fine. Who the hell greenlit the other part? Was it Maurice Hurley, Gene Roddenberry, or Rick Berman? I know who Mark will pick. I know Maurice Hurley was gone before this episode happened, so I don't know. My rating will come on a later comment. You took the words out of my mouth. It definitely wasn't Maurice Hurley because he wasn't a producer. Sure, they probably had him on as a freelance writer to write this episode. Why they did that again is a mystery to me. But he couldn't greenlight shit because he wasn't a producer at the time. So it had to have been Rick Berman, as you know, because Roddenberry has taken a step back from the show at this stage. So it was Michael Piller, to be fair, probably, and Rick Berman, the 2 of them greenlit this. In fact, Michael Piller talked about in interviews about how he liked the idea of this episode. And I like the idea too, just not the fucking execution. So yeah, to be fair, I'll be fair to Rick Berman in this situation. It was actually probably Michael Piller who was mostly responsible for greenlighting this. Although Rick Berman did get final approval, so yeah, still his fault. Anyway, next comment is from Ricky, who says, Mark, you once mentioned a top 10 most contrived episodes in all of Star Trek, and I think this should qualify for that list. I mean, are you you're telling me in the 23rd century, with all the computers and libraries, I'm supposed to believe that Geordi had no idea that Leah Brahms was married? No way, don't buy it. He didn't know that, so the show could happen. I'm sorry, but the episode is frustrating to watch, to see Geordi going nuts and acting stupid towards Leah Brahms. He comes off as an angst, hormone-driven teenager, and not a great chief engineer that he is. I especially didn't like the scene where she discovers the hologram recording of herself and confronted Geordi about it. That felt like a sitcom trope, but I did like towards the end when Geordi and Leah team up and discovered a way to wean the baby alien off the ship. That was cool, and that's what saved the episode for me, but the rest of it was very frustrating, so my rating was a 4 out of 10. Now, I also like that the scene where Leah and Geordi work together, but it was kind of undermined by the fact that she should fucking hate him right now and should report him to HR and file some sexual harassment charges against him rather than working with him. Well, I mean, they do need to save the ship. It would be more important for her to survive, but still, they were acting like they were best buddies while they were working together. Anyway, another comment from Stephen Kennedy that says, my rating for Universe Adult of Cringe is 3 puppy love moments for Geordi out of 10. So let's have some fun with top 10 sayings from Mark after these comments. As his face is red like a strawberry after reviewing this episode. I love that line in Scrubs. Alright, so now Steven's going to say his comments on a couple episodes that I already did a long time ago, so he wasn't able to have comments on. The first one is the most toys. Data, you will surrender yourself to the authorities. Kivas Fajo, or what? You'll fire? Empty threat. We both know it. Why don't you accept your fate? You will return to your chair and entertain me and my guests. If you don't, I will kill someone else. Him, perhaps. Their blood will be on your hands too, just like poor Vara's. So you have one alternative, and it's to murder me. Go ahead. Fire. If only you could feel rage over Vara's death. If only you could feel the need for revenge, then maybe you could fire. But you're just an android. You can't feel anything, can you? It's just another interesting intellectual puzzle for you. Another one of life's curiosities. Now, one thing I do know for certain after reading that is I'm nowhere near as good as an actor as Sal Rubinek. I will admit that flat out, but that's not my job. I'm not a professional actor. Anyway, Data, I cannot allow you to continue. If you look at Data's face during the speech that Fajo was giving, Data was analyzing and coming up with the conclusion that the Fecker needed to be stopped by any means. So in a way, Fajo was responsible for Data's firing the weapon. Yes, I know Data is an android, however, he was left with one course of action as his analysis of the pros and cons, so I have no problem with what Data did here. Data, a Verilon T disruptor. It belongs to Fajo. Riker, Mr. O'Brien says the weapon was in a state of discharge. Data, perhaps something occurred during the transport, Commander. If this was any other person on the Enterprise, you could within reason understand that they could accidentally have pressed fire on the disruptor while they were being beamed away. However, for Data, it is impossible. Maybe Data was trying to bluff so he could try and do it again against Riker during the next poker night. It didn't work as Riker knew Data lied about firing the weapon. So my rating is 8. What about lore so Data isn't unique? So Kivas Fajo, you made a massive error, and the universe of collectors should ban him for life for trying to deceive them out of 10. P.S. Sal Rubinek was an amazing as Kivas Fajo, and that I completely agree with. But, you know, they thought that Lore was floating in space somewhere at this time. This was before the episode Brothers, so they didn't know Lore was still alive, to be fair. But I guess technically he was still out there if he was floating in space. But, yeah, that's a technicality. I'm fine with it. But yeah, Data absolutely fired that weapon. And the reason why that line about him saying, oh, maybe it discharged by accident, was just something the writers threw in because they were uncomfortable with the fact that Data killed him. Whereas the writer and the director and the actor all agreed that Data most definitely fucking killed, or at least tried to kill Fajo. Which absolutely is my headcanon. I don't care what anyone else says. So Riker should have known straight away. Oh, so now we're getting into Future Imperfect. Riker should have known straight away that he was in a holodeck when Beverly told him he was captain of the Enterprise, as Riker loves turning down promotions. When Deanna Troi tells Riker that men replaced her as ship counselor, I like that as Caroline McCormick's played a counselor on the show Law and Order. I always laugh when Riker tells Picard to shut up, as he wouldn't have the balls to do it in a real situation. I said shut up, as in close your mouth and stop talking. I love that line too. Riker having deep feelings for Minuet is completely ridiculous. So Riker loves a hologram over I don't know maybe Deanna Troy or even Utah, that would make more sense. If this was Geordi, I would accept that. Ooh, burn on Geordi. But only if it was Leah Brahms. Sorry, Geordi, but it's so easy to reference you with stuff like that all the time. So my rating is 8. Even in a holodeck simulation, Riker still looks for clues that he isn't the captain of the Enterprise and was meeting with Tom Luck and Picard. Cancelled because Riker never bothered going back. Yet another reason that Riker hates being a captain out of 10. So now, top 5 sayings from Mark. Number 5, this episode is underrated. Number 4, this episode is overrated. Number 3, mustache twirly villain. Number 2, I blame Rick Berman. Number 1, the reason why, so the episode can happen. I should point out, point blank, that number 1, the episode can happen thing, I stole from the pitch meetings. If you don't know, Ryan George on YouTube does these pitch meetings where he, pretend to be the producer and the screenwriter who's pitching a movie, and they'll point out all the flaws. And he has a lot of catchphrases that he says a lot, like super easy, barely an inconvenience, or the producer guy saying something is tight. But one of the things he'll often say is, when the producer will ask, so, why does that happen? And the screenwriter replies, so the movie can happen. And so I kind of stole that to whenever I see a plot hole that seems, or contrivance that seems it doesn't make any sense, it's just there so that the episode can happen. I will say, so the episode can happen. It's funny that that's my number 1 saying, according to Stephen Kennedy. I never realized how often I said episodes were under or overrated. Maybe I've just been saying that more recently as we're getting into season 3 and 4, because there are some episodes I think that are overrated and some I think that were underrated. Or maybe I do say it all the time. I don't know. I never noticed. Mustache twirly villain, absolutely. I do say that a lot. I think, to be fair, I think I got that saying from my sister, who also uses it a lot. But yeah, I definitely use that one a lot. I blame Rick Berman. Well, he usually is to blame, to be fair. At least, and I'm not as bad as Lord Runner. I don't know if you ever watched his channel where he does his rumination on Star Trek episodes, because he rails against Rick Berman, if you can believe it, even more than I do. In fact, he'll have this bit where he'll get like a pillow. And he'll be like, this is Rick Berman. Starts hitting them. Or he'll be like, hi, I'm Rick Berman. I fucked up this episode. So, look. Yes, I do blame him a lot, and he does deserve the blame, but at least I'm not as bad as some other people in that regard. So, next comment is from Norman Buchwald, who says, the one thing going for Galaxy's Child is that it blends the A and B story, and I do admit this sea creature, like being out in space, is quite fascinating. Also, how Beverly Crusher oversees the birth from the dying parent. Then it's time where Geordi should now pay the price for what he oddly did in the holodeck back in Booby Trap. The problem, they make Leah Brahms have this mighty attitude, thus makes her a unreasonable antagonist, like one of those skeptical scientists or blinders on admiral that sometimes comes on board in Trek. And then, at the end, after she learns about Geordi's program, she apologizes. Not Geordi, she. Geordi says in defense, he tried to be nice to her. I mean, Geordi, realize how inappropriate and intimidating this is. You apologize. But oh, the computer/engineering nerd must be forgiven. Never mind all the work that Brahms did in the original designing the latest for the Galaxy class. Now, it wasn't until maybe 4 years later I saw in repeat Booby Trap after Galaxy's Child. So as you can imagine, I found this episode for the most part dull, but now that I see it as a sequel and how it's handled, oh no. Leah Brahms should have brought Geordi to some type of Federation court and for harassment, just for inviting her to dinner at his quarters in a clear context Leah now knows once she sees the holodeck program. Very inappropriate. And while not as much as a character assassination as the loss was for Troy, this episode does go there a bit for Geordi. 3 old visors out of 10. I hate the loss more. I think that's a worse episode than this one. But I would actually think in terms of character assassination, this one's worse. What they did to Geordi, because Troy was kind of already not that interesting of a character or well developed, and but here, yeah, I think they assassinated his character just a tad bit more. But they're both bad examples. But yes, Geordi should be brought up on charges of sexual harassment, and he should be forced to see counselor Troy or someone to give them classes on how to interact with female colleagues. Anyway, thanks so much, patrons, for your comments. So, my rating for Galaxy's Child out of 10. This one's a really hard one to rate because, on the one hand, I hate that Geordi and Leah Brahms storyline. It was like one of the most cringy things that TNG ever did. But on the other hand, I like the storyline with the Galaxy's Child. I think it's one of the most interesting B plots, and I think it was actually very powerful that Picard thought he murdered this being, and he was really upset. Well, he did murder it, and he was really upset over that, but then found he could make some sort of penance by at least saving the child, and that was actually very emotionally powerful. So I'm torn between the two plots. So I think I'm going to go with a 5. Average. It's tough. It is really tough with this one. But I think the cringiness of how Geordi behaves, and mainly, as I said, ultimately is just a badly written script, because the writers were thinking they were doing one thing, but in fact they were actually doing something else. And I know they didn't intend to make Geordi a creep who sexually harasses his coworkers, but that's what they did, even though they didn't intend to do it. So I can't give it a positive rating because of that. But not only did I love the B plot with the weird space creature, I get what they were going for with Leah Brahms. The concept was good. So because of that, I will give it the highest negative rating, a 5. But yeah, it's really hard to rate this one because I'm so split on the different storylines. So I think down the middle makes the most sense, and towards the negative side because it is more cringy. The Geordi storyline is more cringy than the space creature storyline is good. So it sways that way. In fact, I was thinking of giving it a 4, but I thought no, because the concept of the episode was good. So I'll give it the benefit of the doubt. Even the Geordi storyline could have done well, and there are aspects of that storyline I like, but they really fumbled it. And Maurice Hurley just loves doing sitcom-y shit. That's just the bottom line here. So, and isn't it weird that All Good Things said that Geordi in the future that Geordi married Leah Brahms? That's most cringe-inducing at all. And Picard season 3 in the proper timeline showed Geordi, and he had the same 2 daughters that were in All Good Things, the same 2 names, but they didn't mention who Geordi was married to or who the mother of these children were in Picard season 3. And I was hoping that they would specifically name someone who is not Leah Brahms, but they didn't make that, because that's just wrong. That's just, oh, how did you meet your How did you meet? How you know how I met your mother? I sexually harassed her, and I made out with a holodeck version of her before I even met the real her. That's not a good How I Met Your Mother story. Just saying. Anyway, that is it for my review of Galaxy's Child. So, let's bring up the schedule here to see what's coming up next. On Monday, I will be doing my top 10 Star Trek movies soundtracks. So, counting down the 10 movies in order from my least favorite to my favorite musical soundtrack. And then on Thursday, I'll be reviewing the latest episode of Discovery. And then on Saturday, I'll be covering Night Terrors. And then the following Monday will be my review for Identity Crisis. So that's what's coming up on my channel, so be sure to check it out as I continue to cover Star Trek Next Generation and many other shows as well. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that, and thanks a lot for watching.